Okay, so this is class 6 of Defiance and Devotion. Where if you have the Sefer, we're on page 23. We're in section 7. If you don't have the Sefer, then you can look on the link that I sent out. There's a link. You can see the book is online on Chabad.org, and you can open up the link or print it out. We're in section 7, whatever page that is. Oh, okay. So I see that I'm a little bit delayed on my own Zoom. I don't know if you're experiencing that or not. So I hope it'll be clear. I'm not sure why it started up again, but we'll see. Hopefully it'll be clear. Okay, so but basically we had a little bit of a break. So just to remind everybody what we're doing, the mimer is beginning with the idea that Purim also is Purim theme, so it's appropriate that we're learning this over Purim time. That the Vekibeil HaYehudim, that the Jewish people, or the Kibel HaYehudim rather, that the Jewish people accepted what they had already begun at the beginning of the Torah, and we started with a question: how could it be that they reached a higher level at the time of Purim when they were in exile and so on? And then it talks about how their essential faith was aroused by Mordechai at that time. And then it starts to talk about the idea of faith versus which is like a surrounding light versus the permeating light of Hashem, and ultimately the soul as being a parable for Hashem. The way that Hashem fills the world is the way the soul fills our bodies. So it's become a discussion, like we're in the middle of the discussion about how the soul fills the body in 3 different sort of main ways: in the head, in the torso, and in the legs. And that's a parable for how Hashem fills the world in the what's called Mimalik, called Alman level, which is the permeating light of Hashem in the world, and how that's a light of Hashem that we can at some level relate to and understand. Just like we can sort of see and understand a little bit about how the soul permeates the body in 3 different ways in the body. And we're going to sort of discuss a little bit later on this idea of the surrounding light of Hashem and the surrounding power of the soul, and then talk about, how Mordechai affected the Jews and so on at that time with arousing these levels. So we talked about the legs first, which are the lowest level of the body. And it at the same time that we're talking about how Hashem fills the world in 3 different ways, and when we're talking about how the person's soul fills the body in 3 different ways, we're also talking about how it represents different levels in the Jewish people. At least with the legs, we're talking about how it represents different levels in the Jewish people, and about how that represents the like the masses of the people. And we see that from the pasuk where Moshe says that he's amidst the 600,000 feet of the nation, referring to like the regular people, so to speak, versus the leaders. And talk about how the legs serve a function for the body, which lifts up the body and propels the body forward, and how the people of the nation also do that. The importance of the regular, so to speak, people of the nation, how the people who support Torah learning and the people who organize Torah classes are catalysts for the mitzvah. The catalyst for the mitzvah is as more important than the mitzvah itself in some ways. And then we talk about the self-sacrifice of the people, sort of like foot soldiers, right? How the foot soldiers are the ones who really are generally the ones who sacrifice their lives in a war, right? They're like, they move forward. So the self-sacrifice of the common people. And then it talks a little bit about the life force in the torso of the person, how that life force enlivens much more refined organs. There's no like organs in the legs, but in the torso, all the organs like the heart and all the different systems of the body are found in the torso, and how if there's even a small hole in any of those organs, there's a huge issue for the person's life force, basically. And so that idea that there's more refined items, so to speak, in the torso, plus even the torso also has this idea of mobility, just like the feet do. And however, the mobility that is in the torso is of a more refined level than the mobility in the legs, as is evidenced, the Vekibeil Rebbe explains, by the difference between like the feet, which basically propel a person forward through walking, whereas the hands, which is also the attribute of, or the quality of motion, it's a much more refined motion where we write and draw with our hands. And the ability to write and draw are more refined. They're more expressive than just moving forward with your feet. Talk about the internal, external dimension of movement. So basically, that's where we got up to. And the emphasis of the writing and the drawing is not just the actual movement that the hand does to write and draw, but the inner message that it expresses through the writing and the drawing. Okay, so we're on page, like I said, on page 23, and section 7. So our emotional potentials are in a higher plane than even the inner dimension of the power of movement. So now we're making one more comparison between the life force in the torso versus the life force in the legs, where even though we're talking about the fact that they both have this idea of movement, the movement of the legs is just literally propelling somebody forward or helping them stand up higher or whatever it is. It's a physical movement, whereas the hands write and draw, and writing and drawing expresses an inner thought or idea. But in addition to that, besides for that power of movement, our emotions are also in our torso, right? Our heart is the seat of our emotions. And this idea of the heart, that the emotional potentials are even on a higher plane than even the inner dimension of the power of movement. So even the inner dimension and expressing in writing and drawing, what's being expressed by those movements, the actual emotion itself is on a higher level than movement, and even what is being expressed in the movement. So in that way, the life force in the torso is much higher, more refined than the life force in the legs. It's another way that we see that the life force in the torso, like a third way that we see it. This also holds true for the limbs, which are the vessels for these powers, as evidenced by the heart, which is the seat of the emotions, meaning even the physical limbs, the physical organs that are in the torso are more refined than the legs themselves. So we've discussed a little bit the legs, and we've discussed a little bit the torso. Now it's going to shift to the head, which is the third sort of category of life force in the body, is the head. Nevertheless, when compared to the head, even the torso is of lesser standing, meaning the legs are the lowest level, even physically they're the lowest level of the person, right? And even though they add the height and propel them forward, they're still the lowest level of the person's body. The next level is the torso. Actually, it's shown by it's higher than the legs, right? And the next level up is the head, which is even higher than the torso. Why is the head even on a higher level? For the head contains our most sophisticated capabilities: sight, hearing, taste, smell, and of course, the power of intellect in the brain. So these are even more refined and more sophisticated capabilities, right? These are, as we sort of move up in the body, we also move up in the capacity and the sophistication of the capabilities that are housed in that section of the body. Now, it's quick to say, attaching this importance to the brain is not intended to minimize the importance of the heart, right? We're not just like we're not minimizing the importance of the legs either, but even more so, we're not minimizing the importance of the heart by saying that the intellect, the brain, is on a higher level, right? It's higher physically, and it contains more sophisticated. It's the computer system of the body, right? It's like it regulates everything in the body. But mainly it has these sophisticated powers are housed in our head: sight, smell, hearing, and intellect, right? Indeed, we're not minimizing the heart, because indeed, in regard to a person's life, the heart and brain are equally vital. Just as it is impossible to live without a head, it's impossible to live without a heart, right? So we're not saying that the head is so important and therefore minimizing the heart. We're not minimizing the heart. The heart is also important. A person needs the heart to live. A person needs the brain to live. Like, that's just how it is. And yet there is still something a little bit superior in the head. Okay, these aspects of man's external physical existence are also reflected in his inner life potential, man's inner self. Thus our sages state, any pain but not a pained heart, any infirmity but not an infirmity of the head. I mean, I guess showing, how important, how important those organs are to a person's overall health, right? We don't, God forbid, any kind of issue with the heart or the brain is an issue that affects the entire life force of the body. If a person stubs their toe, it hurts, but it doesn't affect the entire life force of their body. It affects their toe and their nerve endings that, they feel the pain because everything's connected to the head. And so we can feel the pain of a stubbed toe, but it doesn't impact the whole life force of the body and the person's life if they stub their toe, versus, God forbid, if something happens to their heart or something happens to their brain. So it's sort of like in a different category. A healthy person has both a brain and the heart and modulates the influence of one with the other. Meaning, again, we're going to show like on an inner dimension how the two need to work together. So sort of on a technical dimension, the two need to work together because a person can't live without their head and they can't live without their heart. In an inner dimension, they also need to influence the other. So there's a phrase that he's quoting here that says, "There's no wise man like a man of experience." This refers to a person whose wisdom has stood by him in his everyday experience, enabling him to carry out positive activity. So this is, and he's going to explain more in the next paragraph, but this is like that idea that the heart influences the brain influences the heart, right? The person's wisdom is influenced by his knowledge and his experience. How do we see it in, let's say, when it's lacking? It's more obvious than when it's not lacking, right? So when it's lacking, how does it sort of show itself? But to illustrate by contrast, right? Sometimes when we're trying to explain or understand a very fine concept, when we go to its opposite, we can understand it better. So we're going to contrast it to somebody whose heart and brain doesn't work together. There are some people with admirable powers of comprehension. They can understand what is true and good, but their wisdom is only an academic abstraction. They really understand things clearly. They have great powers, intellectual powers. Their brain is working just fine. They understand complicated ideas. They even can understand what's true and good. But what's the problem? It has no effect on the realm of action at all. The brain does not affect the heart, and the heart is not influenced by the brain. In other words, it's two separate worlds, and there's no bridge in between. There's nothing connecting. It's like two different shores with a river in between, and there's no bridge crossing from one to the other. Such a person understands what should be done, but expressing these values in actual life is another matter entirely. Now, I mean, the previous Rebbe was talking about it in a very extreme, right? That there's a person who understands. It's not like he didn't get it, he got it, but he's not doing it, right? Now, that's an extreme example, the extreme example to help us understand. I mean, the story that I always like to tell, which I'm sure many of you have heard me say already many times, but is that story of the ethics professor at Oxford University, right? Where he was caught, I don't know how many years ago this was, many years ago, caught jumping the turnstile in the tube in London, not putting in the money in the tube in London. When he was caught, they said to him, he owes the money, whatever the money is, it's not that much money, right? They said to him, but you're the Oxford professor of ethics. Like, you're a professor of ethics at Oxford University, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And you're a professor of ethics. And what you just did was not ethical. So he said, my friend is a math professor, but he's not a triangle. That's, a specific, very clear example of somebody who maybe understands something on an intellectual level, right? He's teaching this course at a very high level, at a very prestigious college, so you would think that he understands the concept. And he didn't even say when he was caught, oh no, I didn't realize it wasn't ethical. I didn't realize, sorry, I'll pay right away. He didn't even say that. He just said that his friend, who's a mathematics professor, is not a triangle. So why do you think that he, who's an ethics professor, should be ethical? Those are two different things. One is this intellectual comprehension and ability to understand it and teach it, and the other is to apply it to one's life. And those are two different things, which is basically what the previous Rebbe is saying here. Could happen. I mean, we know it could happen. It happens, right? It could happen that a person can completely understand something and not apply it. Now, usually it's not to such a degree, it's not like so extreme, like, oh, they understand everything and they do nothing, right? It's not like that. But sometimes within ourselves, we might experience that, that little disconnect. We need to work maybe in one area, it's very connected, in another area, maybe it's not connected, or whatever it is. Like we all know our parts of ourselves that we might need to work on, and it's also different than saying, I know this is what I need to do and I need to get myself to do it. I'm not able to do it yet. That's also a different thing, right? It's like, that's still influencing the heart. The heart's still talking to the head head's still talking to the heart. It's just, sometimes things take time or take stages or whatever it is. Here, what the previous I was saying, that, in an extreme, right? It's the extreme of it, that it has no effect on the realm of action at all. The brain does not affect the heart is not influenced by the brain. Like, that's the extreme to make the point, right? But for most of us, it's probably a little less extreme, right? We're somewhere in between our heart and our mind, and our heart and our mind working in perfect unison, and our heart and our mind being completely disconnected, right? We probably are in between, and we probably vacillate depending on how much sleep we may have gotten that night, or where we're holding, emotionally about something, or whatever it is. Like, but it's the idea of it is to be aware of the need. And in the body, that's represented by the neck, right? That the neck is the connector between the head and the heart. So that's what connects the brain, or the brain stem, right? Comes from the brain down into the torso. That's really the faculty of Das, which we've talked about before, but that's for a different conversation. So even though we are saying that the head is higher than the heart, and the intellectual power and also all the other abilities that are found in the head are more refined than the torso, right? Sight and hearing and so on are more refined than digestion, let's say. There's just a more refined power, and the intellect is more refined power. We're not discrediting the heart, and we need to make sure that the head and the heart are in conversation with each other. In other places in Chassidus, it talks about how the head is supposed to serve as the director, like director in life, like to determine what's right and what's wrong in a certain way, or to understand something, or to develop it. And the heart is supposed to be like this energy and this enthusiasm and this passion that works together with the head, so that what the person can bring passion, can direct their passion in a healthy, godly way, and that what they're doing can be passionate and excited and with life force, that the two work together, that in a healthy situation the two work together, which is like this idea of the head and the heart working together, basically. Okay. I don't know if there's questions. Yeah.
Just in terms of Yetzer Hara, how does that fit into this discussion? Because I feel like that often blocks head and heart, like that blocks action sometimes, even if we understand it, even if our heart is on board, then bam, here comes a Yetzer Hara. And
well, the Yetzer Hara is sort of the emotions of the animal soul. That's what it is. So, right, the heart can be distracted and, you know, turned to be sort of enamored with itself and its needs or something like that, or its wants, I should say, more than its needs. So that's the example where, right, you want the intellect of the animal soul, you want the intellect of the godly soul to talk to the intellect of the animal soul, to talk to the heart of the animal soul and get it on board. Or to just say either to convince it, or to just say, like, okay, you might want this now, but I'm sorry that you want this now and it's not available. You know, it's sort of like with a kid, right? You can validate that they want something, and if the answer can still be no if it has to be. So sometimes we need to do that to ourselves. We can notice that it's something that we're not so happy with, and we may still have to do it or not do it, depending on what it is. And then sometimes we win the struggle and sometimes we don't.
yeah, it just seems like a good place for it to wedge itself in between, you know, in this process.
Well, it's part of the heart. It's part of the heart. It's
okay.
That's where its seat is.
Okay.
So it doesn't even have to wedge itself in. It's a tenet.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
It's right there. But it has a lot of power and a lot of passion that can be used for good, can be transformed for good.
Talking to this point, can it also mix up the head, that the heart the Yetzer Hara could mix up your thinking as well?
Absolutely. The heart
it could attack both, 100%. Like depending on, you know.
Well, there's an appropriate way for the heart to influence the head, and there's an inappropriate way for the heart to influence the head. But the heart can influence the head. It's not only that the head can influence the heart can influence the head 100%. When our emotions go haywire, our intellect usually turns off. You know, picture a raging bull trying to talk to, somebody trying to talk to a raging bull, or try to talk to a kid who's having a tantrum. It doesn't usually work very well. Right? So yeah, the heart can sort of influence or overcome the intellect. That when a person loses the battle to his Yetzer Hara, that's what it looks like, right? His heart's influencing his head in an inappropriate way. The heart, the Mimer is gonna also talk about how the heart, there's a way that the heart's supposed to influence the head in a healthy way, and there is a piece of the heart that's higher than the head. We'll get to that eventually, but at the moment, from the revealed levels of the soul and creation and the body and everything else, the head is higher than the heart. We see it reflected in the actual creation of the human being, where their head is higher than their torso. And there's two ways that the heart can influence the head, appropriately or inappropriately. Really, the head can also influence the heart inappropriately, right? Like, but that we're not talking about that so much. That's not really part of the discussion here, because here we're just talking about how a healthy brain, and then it needs to be connected to the heart. Because usually when a person is convincing themselves of something that's not true or not healthy, it originated in the heart, and then it just, and then the brain tries to make excuses for whatever's happening in the heart. more or less. Okay. Not yet. I think that point will become clear also as the previous Rebbe continues talking about that part of the heart that you'll see there is a place in the heart that's higher than the head. So we want, I mean, even in the physical body to a certain extent, right? The brain influences the heart, the pumping of the heart and the circulation, everything else. I mean, you need connection to the brain. The heart needs to be connected to the brain. The brain is like the engine for the heart. The instructions, everything comes from the whole computer system of the body is in the head. And the head has to be connected to every organ for it to work properly, right? The neurological system has to connect, the brain has to be connected to every part of the body in order for it to function properly. God forbid there's a sever between the brain and any part of the body, results in paralysis, atrophy, that's what happens, right? That's a stroke, God forbid, right? Is a disconnect of one part of the brain to certain parts of the body. And then that results in paralysis or atrophy of muscle and tissue and organs and everything else, right? Like that's, and at the same time, the heart is the one that pumps the blood, and the brain does need the blood from the heart to function properly. So there is a bit of a two-way street, which is why even though the brain is higher than the heart, but still the Rebbe says, well, we're not trying to minimize the importance of the heart, right? The heart and the brain do need to converse with each other. And the heart is going to have something to add to the brain, as we'll see later. Probably not today, but later on in the mimer. I mean, maybe today, we'll see. Okay, so should we go on? We're ready to go on? Okay, so true health involves both an active brain and an active heart. Okay, each one in its own sphere. Like we said, right? Each of them have a specific job to do. The brain should thoroughly comprehend a concept with due breadth of scope. And then the heart should then translate this potential into actuality, refining the individual's emotions as dictated by his comprehension of the intellectual blueprint. That's the ideal, that's the ideal. Thus, the brain and the heart play equal roles in human life. In other words, we need them both. However, what this point is, nevertheless, the brain surpasses the heart because it is the brain which conveys the ideas that are actualized through the heart. Meaning that raw material of what the heart is going to be connecting with originates in the brain. That thought, that idea, whatever it is, it originates in the brain. Actually, I'm sorry, this is now where it's going to talk right away about these two levels in the heart. I forgot that it's actually in this section, so we are going to get to it right now. Okay, so a question concerning the dominance of the brain can be raised for Ru'usa de Liba, which is an Aramaic term, which refers to the will of the heart, a person's innermost spiritual desire, which transcends his intellect, is expressed in the heart, meaning this Ru'usa de Liba, the will, it's not called the will of the head, it's called the will of the heart. Oh. Can anybody hear me still? I think the transformer just blew.